Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. As he said, I was working in the Mint Hotel. I came up from Los Angeles. I was a sports writer in LA in 1965. How many of you have lived here any longer, or how many have lived here for longer than 50 years?
Harry Burke.
Harry Burke is it.
Off and on. 1964.
I came from LA right after the Watts riot, and that brought me up here. Hank Greenspun hired me. I was a sports writer and actually covered the Watts riot, and was nominated for a Pulitzer for my coverage of that particular event. And so I came up here, worked for Hank Greenspun for a couple of years, took a job at the Mint Hotel as public relations. And in those days, in 1967, 66, in those early years, every year they had a big deer hunting contest. All the hotels downtown had different giveaways. So in 1967, a couple guys by the name of Leroy Wickham and John Sexton approached me to buy a dune buggy for a giveaway for the deer hunters contest. Now, what it was, deer hunters would always stop and register in our hotel. They get a little package, a free drink and stuff like that. And then they get a ticket for a big drawing. And they had to come back for the big drawing at the end of the deer hunters' term, which lasted about 2 or 3 weeks, I think, at that time. And they would register their biggest horns and stuff like that, which made it a real interesting contest. So, long story short, I bought the dune buggy, and to publicize it, I sent the two guys that sold the buggy to me, along with a photographer from the Las Vegas News Bureau, and we had them clocked out by an official from NASCAR from the parking lot at the Mint, and they went off-road all the way to Lake Tahoe, and that was the first race. And so they came back and they said, "God, Norm, this was fabulous. We should do something." And I said, "Well, I've been reading about the Baja 1000. And at the Baja 1000, there were 16 Jeeps that went down the peninsula of Baja in 1965. And it got quite a bit of publicity. Then they did it again in 66 and then 67. So I said, why don't we put together a budget? I used Leroy and John to help me with the budget for laying out the course. And our course, the first year, was a one loop, 400 miles, starting out at the end of Fremont Street, which at that time was a dirt road. And it went all the way up to Baker, to the 76's gas station in Baker, and then came down and back. And it was a 400-mile loop through rocks and sand dunes and desert and everything. And so I had to get approval from Bill Bennett, and we had to come up with a budget. So we came up, he approved it, and I created a budget of $25,000. $10,000 to promote the race and $15,000 for the purse. Guaranteed, unheard of in off-road. And and it was to be promoted in April of 1968. And so we had about 50 entries after I announced it, and sitting around waiting for the entries to come in. And I said, we need help. So I called up an old racing friend of mine, Parnelli Jones. And I said, hey, PJ, you want to race? And he said, where and why? And I said, well, I'm putting together an off-road race. And he said, well, what the hell's an off-road race? And I said, well, I don't know, but I'm just putting it together. You know? I said, I never raced off-road, I raced track. And I said, why don't you talk to Ford about a Bronco? He says, okay. So he comes back to me about a week later and he says, Ford said they'll give me a Bronco to race, and crew and all that kind of stuff, and Bill Strop's gonna prepare it for the race. And I said, great, can I announce it? He said, yeah. So I hired a guy in LA that I knew to help me with the PR in LA, and we had an announcement party in LA, and within 2 weeks, the entry list was up to 115. Everybody wanted to race against Parnelli Jones. One of them was a gentleman who just passed away, Darwin Lamb. And I had made friends with Darwin and the sheriff when I first came here in '65, and so they were pretty good friends of mine. So we went down to bid off Rambler's Jeep. He was the dealer here on Fremont Street, down the street, and he had the Jeep dealership. So Darwin says to, I believe it was John Bidoff, or anyway, his last name was Bidoff. And so we got a Jeep free from him. Now, Darwin takes it to his ranch, has a roll bar put in it, and super tires and all this kind of stuff. I got to use 2 AMC cars as official cars for the first race. And of course, that made a few trips with me in it out to Ash Meadows, because that was the first major pit stop of the race. How many of you people know the history of Ash Meadows? Naturally. It was a whorehouse in the middle of the desert. And it's now a national preserve. Because that's where those little fishies live. And so, anyway, we get the race together. We have 125 entries, I believe, the first time. The budget went over, naturally. I had to call not only Darwin for getting Bureau of Land Management off our back. They weren't going to let us through. So I called Senator Cannon in Washington, D.C. He was really good about taking our phone calls, especially if we were an executive with a major hotel, which the Mint Hotel was at one time a major hotel, and it was owned by Del Webb, so that was a door opener too. So he said, well, what's the matter, Norm? And I said, well, it seems BLM is closing off part of our racetrack. He said, well, why are they doing that? They said it's some protection of the land, there's some sand dune out there. And he said, well, let me check on it. 2 days later, BLM calls and says, well, we'll let you race, but we want $5 for every car in the race. I said, you got a deal. So the race went off. Needless to say, Darwin Lamb beat Parnelli by about 10 miles. Both of them didn't even make it to Ash Meadows. Parnelli crashed 3 times, had a rear axle replaced, 4 wheels replaced, the front end put a new hood on. Darwin passed him, and as he was passing him, Parnelli, the mechanics are working on the Bronco, and he goes by and he tells me this later, said I gave him the big finger, and went past him, and I crashed into a rock because I was watching Parnelli, so he didn't get much further, but he beat him, and that was all he cared about. And of course, Darwin just passed away recently, about 2 weeks ago. Now, let me tell you, I raced myself until 1982 in Baja, California, closed course races. I put together another closed course track race out at the Old Craig Road Speedway. I stayed in off-road racing for a number of years. Closest I ever got to winning my own race was in the late 70's, and I had a single-seat buggy, and I was 2 miles from the finish line, and I was leading my class, and I broke a battery. Now you break a battery in the middle of the desert, you're dead. Well, fortunately there was a pickup truck over on this one little rise in the desert, and they came running to me, and I was running into them. They said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I broke my battery in half." They said, "Well, we'll loan yours." And I said, "Well, it won't do much good because your car battery is bigger than the little battery." He said, "Well, I got jumpers." So I said, "Okay, we got a deal." So we hooked up the battery in between my legs in the front seat of the buggy, ran the jumper cables back to where it's supposed to be hooked up, and I finished sixth. But I was leading the race. I had 2 miles to go. I did eventually win the Baja. I won the 500. Finished third in the Mint 400 in 1975, I think it was. And And now next week's speaker for next month is Jackie Brett, who I've known about 37 years, and she don't forget a thing, believe me. She knows everything I did. Huh?
40 years.
See, she corrected me. I talk about my ex-wife sometimes.